downtown Toronto, and also welcome the audience of folks who are joining us online from wherever you are. This is our Black in Policy, Celebrating Excellence and Addressing Challenges event. My name is Kareem Bardisi. I'm the Executive Director of the Dais. We're a policy and leadership think tank at Toronto Metropolitan University. We take a tech-first approach on some of the toughest economic, education, and democracy policy and leadership challenges in our country, those that are getting in the way of or that could promote shared prosperity and shared citizenship. And we're based at our home here at Toronto Metropolitan University, which is a vibrant home to many communities and many people in pursuit of prosperity and justice and democracy for their communities. I just wanted to say where we are, and we're obviously here at the Dais office. If you're joining online, you may be coming from somewhere else outside Toronto. Downtown Toronto, where TMU is on the territory of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas and New Credit, covered by the Dish with One Spoon Treaty, Treaty 13, and the Williams Treaty. We're committed to honoring our obligations to these nations, treaties, and to justice for Indigenous peoples more generally. At TMU and at Dais, the TMU obviously did a very significant historic act of going through a process that resulted in the renaming of the university and several other important initiatives to recognize the Indigenous solidarity that we as a community need to be in better communion with. Not only we're all treaty people, but many of us have come here as settlers, immigrants, and newcomers in this generation or generations past. And that's, I think, true of almost everyone in this room. There are also generations past who came here involuntarily, particularly as a result of the transatlantic slave trade. And so we also honor and pay tribute to the ancestors of African origin and descent. And we know that there are many rich African descent traditions represented in this room. And we'll see, I think, some of that represented in the conversation today. This celebration is our second celebration that we've done in as many years as part of Black History Month. And it aims to amplify the voices of Black professionals working in public policy, a group of ascendant, important voices that too often don't get the space to share in community the experience of being that and the experience of the challenge and the opportunity and the sacrifice that's involved in being a policy leader in this community. So we're delighted to have 4 exceptional leaders who will be in conversation as part of this. And this event, we are hosting it here at TMU, but it's with our community partner, the Canadian Black Policy Network, represented by Eunice Yeboah, co-founder and executive director of the network, who is one of the panelists today. Her team continues to do incredible work to provide sustainable solutions affecting Canada's Black communities, starting out of a space in the university and now growing to a national presence. And we'll hear more about their work later in the event. Now I'd like to introduce Rahel Appiagyei-David as our moderator for this event. Rahel is our leadership development facilitator here at the Dais, has worked with the City of Toronto on their youth engagement strategy, with the Toronto Youth Cabinet on various City of Toronto budgets and policy advocacy issues. Rahel is a Swiss Army knife of moderation, facilitation, and leadership, runs and is the curator of the Leading Through Policy Change micro-credential that we run here at the Dais, and has also served as a board member on the provincially appointed Youth Challenge Fund. And so Rahel has been instrumental in putting this, imagining this event together with the rest of our team. And I'll throw it to you.
Thank you so much, Kareem. Great. All right, so welcome to everyone who's online, everyone that's in person. I hope everyone's had an opportunity to grab some refreshments before we get started, because I know it's around dinner time, so don't be hungry. And just a few things before I get started as well. One second here. Okay, so it's my pleasure, of course, to moderate the session today. As Kareem mentioned, my name is Rahel Appiagyei-David, and I'll be moderating our awesome panel today. So this evening, we're going to look into the topic, the issue of glass cliff. So this is a newer topic, so not everyone might be exposed to or aware of it. So I'll give you just a quick explanation. In challenging times, individuals from underrepresented groups, including women and people of color, are most likely to be appointed to leadership positions. However, This phenomenon places leaders in precarious situations, leading to potential challenges and setbacks. So what we want to look at today is how can Black professionals working in public policy spaces navigate these situations? We will hear from our panelists as they share tips, guidance, and wisdom about their career journeys. So before we jump into that and begin, I will continue with the housekeeping. So we're going to kick off with some opening questions that I will pose to our panelists. Then we'll open the floor to you folks here in person and the folks online as well. We'll have about 40 minutes for your questions, so there'll be some time. For those joining us on Zoom, please submit your questions via the Zoom Q&A function. For those that are in person, once we get to that point, please just put up your hand, I'll select someone, and you can ask your question at that point. Your perspective is also invaluable, and we're also very eager to hear your questions. Please ensure, though, that your questions are concise, that it's actually a question. All right, so sometimes people want to give us all this context, which we appreciate, but we want to make space and room for everybody. And we also want to be respectful as well with our questions, and also just come genuinely seeking information. And we'll do our best to address as many questions as possible. We may not be able to get to all of them. So we'll close the online portion of the event at 7:15, and the remaining 45 minutes will be for us who are in person to connect, ask questions, get to know each other. Panelists, if you have a few minutes, I'm sure they'll love to connect with you afterwards as well. And with that, I'm delighted to introduce the panel. Let's get to that. So this was specially requested by the panelists that I start with the Queen Eunice. So I will be starting with Eunice Yeboah. Eunice Yeboah is the co-founder of the Toronto Black Policy Conference and co-founder and co-executive director of the Canadian Black Policy Network. She serves as the Toronto Transit Commission's first anti-racism policy consultant in the Racial Equity Office. Eunice is dedicated to addressing anti-Black racism and all forms of racism and discrimination from a public policy perspective, and has spent over 6 years working in varied roles for a number of municipalities, as well as the province of Ontario. Recognized for outstanding early career success and impactful volunteerism, Eunice was selected as part of York University's inaugural top 30 changemakers under 30 lists. Let's give that a hand, right? Okay. She received the inaugural Institute of Public Administration Canada Toronto Region New Professional Award, very long name, and has been featured in Seneca's Polytech's award-winning Challenge Accepted campaign. All right, so Eunice, I wanted to give you an opportunity to add to anything that you said in terms of your introduction, anything I missed, how you want to recognize me.
Thank you. They can call me Eunice, and I would like to share that I think one of the greatest roles that I have the privilege and honor of taking is being a mother to my 1-year-old and a wife to my husband Elvis. So I know you're probably watching, so just say hi. And also a sister and a daughter. So those are that's my bread and butter. So I have to share.
All right, thank you so much. Okay, so next I will introduce Councillor Jamaal Myers. So Councillor Myers was selected as the councillor for Ward 23, Scarborough North on October 24th, 2022. Jamaal was born and raised in Scarborough and regularly takes the TTC to get around his community. Having grown up in Toronto community housing from a young age, he understood education as a key to upward mobility and the importance of properly funded public service. After graduating from New York University, he worked in New York City as a corporate lawyer at global law firms before returning to Scarborough in 2018. For over a year, he volunteered as a community organizer and worked with residents and community groups to improve access to health care, transit, affordable housing, and good jobs. Prior to being elected, Jamaal served as a senior lawyer at the Toronto Dominion Bank, where he worked on challenging environmental, social, and governance matters, including preparing for a changing climate, protecting human rights, and corporate governance. He also served as vice chair of TAIBU, Taboo Community Health Center, a director from the Scarborough Business Association, and a member of the Community Police Liaison Committee for 42 Division. Welcome, Councillor. I'll also give you space to add on and to your bio.
I think that covers it, but it was taboo.
Oh, Taboo, thank you.
Taboo,
Thank you.
yes. It's a Swahili word meaning in good health.
Ooh,
Yes.
all right. And last but certainly not least, I'm going to introduce Asare Kester-Akrofi. So Asare has over a decade of municipal public sector experience with 5 years of tenure at the City of Toronto in various leadership capacities. As the Manager, Strategic Initiatives Office of the Deputy City Manager, Infrastructure Services, another long title, but Asare provides strategic leadership and wraparound executive operational coordination, overseeing complex organizational change initiatives related to multi-billion-dollar city infrastructure projects, public policy development, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, customer experience, and stakeholder relations with city agencies, corporations, and external partners. In his spare time, Asare embraces the role of professor and course director at York University School of Public Policy and Administration, educating interdisciplinary undergrads and master's students, while co-currently teaching at Seneca Polytech School of Public Safety within the honors bachelor's crime intelligence and analysis and police foundation programs. All right, everybody help me welcome Asare. And again, I also want to provide you space to add on and introduce yourself how you wish to be addressed.
Just wanted to say thank you everyone for braving the weather. It's not been easy, and I'm happy to be home. Actually went through at the time Ryerson University, so kind of like full circle.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
Okay. Beautiful. Okay, so we got the housekeeping, we got the introductions. Welcome to you, wonderful audience. I did have an opportunity to speak to one or two of you before the session. I look forward to meeting more of you as well. So let's start with the first question. I'm sure everyone's ready to go, right? Okay, so first question. And this is to each of the panelists, and we'll start with Queen Eunice, okay? How would you define culture, your understanding of Glasscliff, and being Black?
Yeah, I'll start with the Black.
Okay, no worries.
So growing up, I had an issue with being described as Black, because obviously if you look at us visibly, we are not Black. We are not Black at all. We are brown skin. So growing up in high school, elementary school, I was very disconnected from the education system because I didn't understand where that term was coming from and why we were being called Black. My parents are from Ghana. 100 years ago, if I was living in Ghana, nobody would say, oh, there's a Black woman. You would just be known by your tribe, yes, right? Or you'd be referred to by the language you speak or your Ghanaian heritage. So for me, the term Black is a little bit problematic because if you compare the color Black to white, it makes it seem like Black has a negative connotation. And if we look historically, it pretty much did. But the beautiful part of, Black history and our heritage and our culture being Black people is that we have redefined the term, or at least for me, redefined the term to make it more positive, right? In the sense that we are embracing this beautiful melanin, this beautiful tone and skin that we have, and we're redefining what others have, been teaching or have been saying that we are. So if you see the color Black, oftentimes you may associate that with, again, like I said, like a negative idea. But for me, being Black I'm very proud of that, because I often say I call us Black communities and not a Black community because we're not a monolith. We're very diverse and we have so much to offer. So despite there being previous, negative connotations associated with the color, we've now redefined that. And now we're looking at it from a positive light and saying, you know what, as a Black person, oftentimes we are referred to as people who have beautiful cultures, beautiful music, beautiful hair, beautiful this, beautiful that. And so being able to take away or parse that negative sort of connotation and look at it as, okay, you know what? We all come from different areas. Some of us are Jamaican, some of us are Ghanaian, some of us are Trinidadian, some of us are from South Africa, but we have this shared sort of culture, or we have this shared or collective grouping that allows us to be able to relate to each other. So if I walk by a Black woman and a Black woman looks at me and she smiles, I'm like, I know what she's saying. Or a Black man walks by a Black man and he goes like this, we know what, we have that understanding. So I think for me, it's just being able to remove or move away from sort of the negative narrative and redefine how we see ourselves. And that goes to the next question around culture. So very quickly, I think culture can be defined in many ways from a sociological perspective. But for me, culture is the shared heritage. It's the shared ideas and the shared sort of interests that we have. So again, I can be from Ghana and I can still relate to somebody who is from Jamaica because we have that sort of shared history being taken away from our ancestors, right? Yeah. But also changing that to a positive way. So that could be language, that could be arts, that could be your culture, that could be the way we grew up. There's so much when it comes to culture. And then I think the last thing you asked about was the glass cliff.
Got it.
Okay.
Wow. What is your understanding of it?
Glass cliff. So without getting into too many details, just to say me as a Black woman, as a young Black woman, oftentimes I go into spaces and I see that folks are not necessarily uncomfortable, but if I'm in a space where I can see that most people are visibly older than me, to use that term, sometimes I sort of feel like maybe they may not necessarily take what I'm sharing as serious as if I were maybe like an older white male, for example, right? And I'm sorry, but I just need to use that sort of juxtaposition. But for me, that term is, again, problematic in the sense that I don't think that I should ever be judged by the way that I look or by my age, or just put into a position because, oh, right now we're hiring a bunch of Black people and we want you to just represent the voice of the Black community. I cannot do that, right? And so with that specific term, putting me, for example, in a position that is actually meant for me to fail is a problem, because then if I'm put in a position that's meant for me to fail, even when I try my best to succeed, the circumstances, the infrastructure is not there for me to do it. So now if I don't succeed, folks will say, I told you, they're just not as good to do this job, or they're just not fit. Whereas if I had the structures, I had the support, I had the inclusive policies, or the support of my manager, senior manager, I'd be able to thrive, right? And so I think that's very problematic when it comes to both race as a Black woman, as well as gender as a woman, and then age. So
Okay, thank you so much. Councillor Jamaal, would you like this one?
Sure. So I guess I approached the question a bit differently.
Sure.
So I just kind of looked at it all together. So I looked at what does Black Canadian culture look like? And I feel like sometimes we have a tendency to, it's the wrong word, but get wrapped up into like the African American experience, and we sometimes ignore our own experience, which is like quite unique and interesting. I mean, you have Black Francophones, you have families that have been here for hundreds of years, whether they were in Nova Scotia, Southern Ontario. You have the first wave of like West Indian families. You have more recent waves from Africa. And I think, we're getting better at it, so you've seen, for example, Viola Desmond. You've seen us promote that kind of history that often goes unrecognized, unnoticed. And I mean, I'll give you an example. So I go to a lot of Black History Month events, and the person people often say they most admire at these events, Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King was fantastic, but we have so many amazing Black Canadians that often go unnoticed. Charles Roach, Dudley Laws, Viola Desmond, Elijah McCoy, all of these amazing figures that I really think it's part of our history, but it's difficult because, as she said, we're Black communities. So we don't have like the African American experience. I lived in the US for 7.5 years. So it's a very unique experience in that everyone sort of has that common theme in their family. Most Black people, they came to the US through slave trade. Whereas here we all came here in very different ways, but we still are sort of creating our own unique culture. Now, I always use this example. My grandfather played cricket and soccer. His grandkids play basketball.
Yeah.
But in addition to hip hop, rap, we listen to reggae, calypso. So we still take parts of our culture and we're sort of melding it with sort of the culture here, and it's sort of creating its very own unique Canadian identity.
Don't forget Afrobeats.
Afrobeats, yeah, exactly. And so it's really interesting of seeing the Black community in Canada. We're sort of reaching that critical mass where you can really start having a much more profound impact on the culture. So I think 10% of Toronto is Black. I think in Ajax, Pickering, the figure is up to about 15-20%, which is the highest in Canada. And we're only still 2, 3, or 4% of the population, so not huge, but in certain areas, Montreal, Toronto, our population is growing, and you start seeing that critical mass. So, perfect example, City Council. For years, City Council had 1 Black councillor. This year we have 4. So you just see the difference in the policy, you see the difference in the conversation, you see the difference in the questions. So I think that's really how I sort of define Black. I guess Black Canadian culture in my mind is still being defined because it's still it's not new, but sort of it's evolving into this beautiful mosaic that's Canada. So there's really no definition of what a Black Canadian is. It could be Francophone, it could be Anglophone, could be someone who's been here for hundreds of years from Nova Scotia, it could be someone who arrived yesterday. And I think that's really one of the unique things about our culture. In terms of the glass cliff, it's a very interesting phenom. And I was thinking about this question. I thought of 2 people immediately. So Claudine Gay. So I don't know if you've heard, she was the president. She was the shortest tenure of any president in Harvard's history. I think she lasted, it's under 6. And she made some unforced errors. Was it anything that was particularly disastrous given what you've seen other people do? Probably not. But again, as Eunice said, she wasn't it seemed like she wasn't really set up to succeed. She didn't really have the tools or support when things fell apart. But then I think of another Black person who sort of arose from crisis, and that was Barack Obama. When he was elected president, the economy was crashing. There were 2 major wars, Iraq and Afghanistan, and it sort of seemed like that, people just wanted to try anything. So we'll even try electing a Black man to solve our problems. And, he did, but it was obviously difficult. And, everyone can sort of see how this president was being treated differently from other presidents. But he sort of used that crisis opportunity to sort of walk through that door and seize that opportunity. And, now you see a Black vice president woman. And that's because of sort of, someone had to be first. And, oftentimes it's unfortunate, but there oftentimes has to be sort of this crisis opportunity, and you just have to sort of sometimes take it, but make sure that you have the tools to succeed when you're in those positions.
Okay, I have a follow-up question, but I want to give us to respond as well. So do you want me to rephrase the question? I know it's been a while since I read it.
No.
You're good?
I think
Okay.
I'm good. And similar to Councillor, I had a different take and approach in answering this question. So I'll start off with Black. Black to me, I just used words to define it. Powerful, gifted, resilient, fragmented, trials and tribulations. I think these words define the experience, the ways in which Black people nationally and also internationally have to walk spaces that aren't necessarily designed for them. When I think about the glass cliff, I think about the precarious nature of the seats that women of equity deserving groups occupy. And the reality is that, yes, they're not set up for success, but that notion, you have to be twice as good to go just as far. So there's in some cases undue burden, undue duress. And when I localize that to my own experiences, I've seen many senior leaders in various organizations that I've occupied have to take on a lot more than their predecessors. And they always happen to be women of color and predominantly Black. During COVID, I'll use for an example, you know, let's be real, COVID mashed up most organizations, right?
We need to translate mashup.
Mash
just for
up?
people.
You don't need to translate now. COVID destroyed many organizations.
Inclusive conversation.
Right. And during this period of time, there were many leaders within my organization that happened to be Black. 4 years later, we've seen a 30% attrition of Black leaders of the city of Toronto. People that were a beacon of hope and light for many organizations within the public service, not only localized to the city and its agencies and corporations, but also across the public sector more broadly. And Toronto, in terms of representation, we do extremely well. To your point around, 10% population, we're about that mark within the organization as well. So it's refreshing. But with that being said, at the senior leadership level, it's really beginning to shift exponentially. In terms of culture, I'm going to get academic here. I think of it as folk tradition, ways of viewing and doing shared by members of a particular ethnic group. And the transmission is from generation to generation, that's enculturation. And it promotes agency, it promotes development. But also, you can't discount the fact that geographical location plays a role in the ways in which you communicate the food that you eat. And it's very fluid, right? The ways in which you walk through life, the people you interact with, they can really greatly influence the cultures that you take on. So for me, it's a very kind of challenging concept in terms of just localizing it, because as we've said, it's not monolithic.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
So because of the time, I had two other questions. I want to skip them and go to my last question. So we'll start. I'm going to my last question. Because we have Q&A and I promised people time. I want to honor it. All right, so we're going to the last question. And Asare, I'll start with you. How do you see the experience of Black Canadians changing in the next 5 to 10 years? Are there things that can be done currently by Black Canadians and allies?
We're in a safe space here, right? You sure? Some people are like, I don't know. Oh, careful what you say, brother. As safe as possible. Okay. Okay, so from the context of the experience is not a positive one, right? So I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's incredibly challenging. And, the ways in which we as a community more collectively approach issues of anti-Black racism and oppression, so on and so forth, it's not something that we can do alone. So what I would say in response to that question is the importance of unity, the importance of allyship in being able to achieve these goals, right? I've been similar to you, Councillor, but not actively in these events. I've been participating by going to many Black History Month events, and every year we're celebrating, looking backwards, thinking about what's happening, moving forward. The struggle has been the struggle, and it's iterative, and it's painful, and it's just like any other growing pains, right? Accompanied with time, it's just hard. What we need to be mindful of is, given the state from a precarity perspective around cost of living, our ability to mobilize financially, we can't do that alone as a community. We have to rely on other communities of inclusion, right? We have to look at all the other struggles and band together and move forward in order to address some of the issues that we're facing. Because frankly, the work isn't ours, right? We don't need to know how Black people are oppressed. It's about how the rest of the broader community responds to the struggle. And I think the last thing I'll say is the future that I hope for is one where we just don't designate a month in representation and education, our struggle. Right? There'll be a time where we don't have to worry about our humanity, our dignity, right? And I think that that's the best outcome, but until then, we have to plant necessary seeds now that we won't necessarily sow tomorrow.
Okay, that's very powerful. Thank you. Can we? So the timekeeper has given me a strict Q&A time, but I'm going to just, if you don't mind, just give me extra 2 minutes. Okay. So Councillor Jamaal, I want to give you an opportunity to answer that question as well. How do you see the experience of Black Canadians changing in the next 5 to 10 years? And are there things that can be done currently by Black Canadians?
So I guess I'll answer that question in reverse. I think the most powerful tool Black Canadians can use when trying to advance goals or policies is data. I think like all of the concrete changes that have happened have been through data. Like you can show, so Taivu, perfect example. Taivu was a community health center in Malvern, in my ward, that has a mandate to specifically focus on the health and well-being of the Black community. It is the only community health center in North America with a specific focus in its mandate to focus on the Black community. But that was only possible because there was data to show that there were disparate impacts in the healthcare being received, and how Black people take to sort of medical information. So Levin Gerber-Michael, the executive director of Taivu, he gave this, it's funny, but it's true. This example of, diabetes, which is a big issue in the Black community. And he said, you have to tell a Black person 6 or 7 times they have diabetes before they actually believe it. They tend not to take these things seriously and they don't treat it well. So it's because a lot have had, bad experiences accessing healthcare. So they don't trust medical professionals. There's been, the history of, that experimentation on Black people, the Tuskegee experiments. So a lot of Black people and Indigenous people just have a resistance to accepting, medical attention. But sort of when you have, so even convincing people that this was needed, it wasn't like something easy or like, a francophone health center. Oh, well, because obviously they need someone who speaks their language, like something like concrete like that.
Yeah.
So you really had to have the data to back up why this was needed. Another example was, and Eunice, you probably know about this more than I do, the over-policing of Black transit riders.
Yeah.
And it showed through the data that Black transit riders were being disproportionately ticketed for fare enforcement compared to everybody else. So that has led to a number of changes in terms of how we do fare enforcement at the TTC. So for me, whenever you're trying to advance something within the Black community, the data is key because it sort of gives everyone sort of a solid base of knowledge to start off, and it's objective. The data is what the data is. And the second part of the question is where do I see us going in 5 to 10 years? I definitely think where I see the community going is there's definitely capacity building. So I see, for example, Taivu, again, I'm going to bring them up. They've done a lot of work around like, what does Afrocentrism governance look like? So we have governance from the perspective of like a Western model, but what if we were sort of to bring in Afrocentric principles into that while still keeping those principles that we need because we're operating in this space.
Yeah.
So I see a lot of capacity building in terms of building up people who can run organizations or govern and build structures that are sustainable beyond that individual. And I think that's really where the community needs to go. I think allyship is, really important, but I also think there has to be that capacity building. And you see another one, the Black Opportunity Fund, where the government of Canada, that was the first time the government of Canada has ever invested in Black communities since Black people have been in Canada. The Black Opportunity Fund was created, and they have been investing in businesses. So you see sort of like that, capacity building within the community to sort of self-fund, to get to some sort of sustainable funding model where you can sort of have more expansive and visionary projects. But you really got to start from one, having the data to back up your argument, and two, having the people with the capacity and the skills to actually run these things once they get off the ground.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much. So we started a little bit late, but I want to make sure that we get to the audience questions as well. So if there's anyone in person who has a question, I'm also going to just check my phone for any online questions as well. And it can be directed to a specific speaker or to the panel as a whole.
Yeah.
You have one? Your name, please?
Samuel.
And can you please speak up? I will try and restate your question for those online. But
Sure.
yes.
My name is Samuel Asante Nanaya Ose.
Wow.
I think we touched on something I want to ask about. I've been here for 5 years. I moved here from the UK. I originally was born in Ghana, and I moved to the UK when I was 11. We've been trying to define what the Black Canadian experience is in Canada, and I think you're right. It's still forming. However, I think I guess the trend is usually a lot of the older folks usually go back home towards the winters. Does Canada have any type of governance or any policy to support that with a connection back home? I know that people are still coming here and immigrating here, but is there a connection back home?
So, sorry, for online folks, your question is, does Canada have a program or supports for folks that come here and go back to their home countries?
I think it's not even a Black thing. I think usually everyone usually goes back home, being immigrants in Canada. So usually that connection of like going back home or keeping up the diaspora industry is huge. Even the UK, and like you said, it may still be forming. People will get settled first before they still go back home, but eventually they will. And I think that's part of the connection in terms of building that Black Canadian experience. So I'm wondering whether Canada has anything to support that at all.
So I don't know if anything Canada has in terms of supporting people going back home. However, I do know that there is, last year we actually had a meeting with the Canadian Congress of Black Parliamentarians. And it was, Black officials from across Canada met. There was about 40 of us. And it was history making because there's never been 40 elected Black officials from across Canada have met. And we sort of discussed common issues that we'd like to focus on. And one of the areas that, that was really a hot topic of discussion was making sure that Black people were in a position to take advantage of investment opportunities, both in the Caribbean and Africa, as those are some of the fastest growing economies. And you really see China making huge investments in those places as sort of, a place where there's ample resources and really making, and we never really sort of got past the discussion, but that's something that I can see the Canadian government as a whole. Canada has huge, I think Canadian companies are the biggest in mining in the world. So Canada has huge operations in the West Indies, in Africa. We have the biggest mining companies. So I think, generally speaking, there isn't no formal policy, but there definitely is talk of how do Black Canadians take advantage of opportunities in the West Indies and in Africa and sort of create those mutually beneficial relationships.
All right, thank you. Let's take one more question and I'll go online. Yes, please. Yes, you.
I have to introduce myself.
Yes, your name would be great.
My question is more so, I guess, like what you were just speaking about in terms of investment. What do you mean by that? Like investing in what?
Sorry, just to rephrase it for online folks.
Okay.
The question was, what did Councillor Myers mean by investments?
So I guess that is really a subjective. I'll just give an anecdotal example. My dad and my stepmom went to Africa for the first time ever, and they just got back 2 weeks ago. And my dad is already planning his next trip back because he found out in Ghana there are apartments that are quite nice, and they're only $50,000. And he was like, okay, I gotta go buy some like apartments in Accra before the prices go up, because he saw the investment opportunity. He said, they don't have a lot of the infrastructure is missing in terms of like the roads, they're not as well developed. But in terms of like the housing, he's like, it's there, it's affordable. I want to go back and I want to like buy some of these properties as like an investment property. So that's just one person doing that on a more individual level. What that looks like. So I go to church with a woman, her name is Charity, and what she does is she works with women in African villages that make clothing, and she sells it back here. So she finds buyers for either the cloth or the finished products, and then finds so she sources the designers and she finds buyers. So that's how she works in that. So everybody has a different connection to whatever part of the countries that they are from. My dad has, he's not, we're Jamaican. So, but there's these opportunities that really are there, that it's really just a matter of, you taking advantage of them. There's no formal government policy encouraging Black people to invest in these countries, but there's nothing stopping you from an individual from going out and seeking an opportunity.
Or starting a collective of people.
Yeah.
Right? I think Asare spoke about unity, right? These might be opportunities, and there's people in this room who might be interested to start here, right? Okay. So one question from online, Eunice, I'm going to give this to you just because we haven't heard you speak in a minute, right? So how do we deal with a situation where data isn't enough because systemic racism is too big of a stronghold? And then they just give an example of data being provided that targets Black people, but when it's time to vote, they're not being voted in favor to either provide the money or the funding to develop the policies around the issues.
Okay. So I think it's a great question, if I understand it correctly. But I understand it, and I agree, to be very frank. I agree that we do need the data because we need that objective truth, or that objective sort of narrative of what's going on. But I honestly, and it goes back to your last question, I honestly hope that we can get to the points in 5 to 10 years where we don't always have to justify things with data. So if there's no data, are our stories and our experiences not valid? That's kind of where I come from, because I think being in this space of policy as well for the past like 7, 8 years, it's like you're always in another meeting where you have to re-explain why we're doing something, or somebody doesn't understand why we're even doing whatever it is that we're doing, right? And so I think that while that's a good question, and I think that the data and the hard sort of numbers kind of paints a solid picture for governments, organizations, public sector actors, and private sector actors that like to act on whatever the issue is. I think that we have so much data from today back to 100 years that speaks to the issues that keep on coming up. So I don't think it's necessarily a thing where we have to focus on, okay, we have to collect more data and more data and more data to justify. I think we have the tools, I think we have the historical data, but I think what we can do is use that data to then sort of build out solutions to these complex issues. So for example, at the Canadian Black Policy Network, we have directors that focus on policy and research. And what we like to do is we like to bring our experiences, go out to community organizations and individuals as well to hear their perspectives, to bring in that narrative as well, so that we're not only looking at hard data, and then if there is no hard data, then we're just not addressing issues. We have to be able to get beyond that, I think beyond that. And I think you're correct, Councillor, that the numbers definitely do matter. Like with TTC, for example, a lot of the work in the Racial Equity Office would not have come about if there was no hard data that was actually pointing to the issue. But I do think at the same time, the reason why there was a need to go back and relook at the investigation that happened between the young Black individual and enforcement officers was because the person was saying that this actually happened. The investigation wasn't done correctly. This is my narrative. And even though there was a previous investigation that was done, our data that said TTC is not a racist organization, my narrative said otherwise. So now let's go and look back at it again. And so I hope that in the next 5 to 10 years, we can get beyond this, we just need to have hard data before we do something, and actually listen to these narratives and take those narratives as part of actual data that we can use to address issues. That's my perspective.
Okay, thank you so much. There's another question online that I think kind of connects to the one you just answered. Sorry, I'll give you a chance to do this one. So do we need to start funding and using more evidence-based research to bring awareness to issues that affect Black Canadians? And who decides the importance of the issue?
Okay, well, if I look at the context of the Toronto,
Speak up a little bit.
if I look at the context of Toronto, we have 50 years of data in relation to the plight of Black Torontonians and the issues that are affecting our community. Furthermore, we have an action plan to confront anti-Black racism. And there's multiple actions. You can always go on and look at where we are with regards to that plan. But what our social development and finance administration area within the city of Toronto is doing is they're mobilizing the next generation of this plan, the next iteration of this plan, which is going to take us into 2034. Okay. The data is the data. The more you speak to our community, the more it's validated. And so we need to start looking at different ways of addressing the issue. This challenge really brings forward this notion of targeted universalism. Has anybody heard this term, targeted universalism? It's the notion that a rising tide lifts all ships, right? So if you address the issues in relation to, for example, hiring, equitable hiring for Black people within the city of Toronto, it benefits all equity deserving. When you look at policy, you have to think about some of the underpinning validations in relation to who's making these rules, who is benefiting from these rules being implemented. And for our policy experts out there, largely due in part, outside of some of our not-for-profit leaders, it's not Black people in the room making decisions for Black people, right? And it's not to our benefit, it's performative. Some people have a performance planner, they have to hire X amount of Black people, so let's just bring them in. And what ends up happening is we have a large complement of Black staff in precarious, underserved roles, entry level, with no real projects of growth and development. So when you think about policy, you have to think about the actual decision makers who's benefiting, the power structure, which has the cultural aspect, the social aspect, the economic aspect, and then you have to really kind of work backwards in terms of understanding, you know, these decisions. But in the context of Toronto, there's a lot of optimism for what the next decade is going to look like. But with that being said, we have to look across the intersectionality of these opportunities as well.
Okay, thank you so much. And I just wanted to add, the Leading Through Policy Change course talks about how policy decisions are made at all levels of government. So it might be a course you'd be interested in. Is there anyone else from the in-present audience with a question? I do have some more online, but can I get you gentlemen this box?
Yes. I think
I've heard a few points from data to storytelling to people moving, away or moving back, and also question around what type of investments. So before I get to my question, my parents moved here before I actually came here as an international student, but they wanted something better and more for my siblings. But they've done that part, and their parents cold, so they're looking at going back.
Okay.
But it's not just my parents' generations. It's that my little brother's generation is also wanting to go back because they've been going back every summer and they see how fun it is. They see how you can be a creator and have a business and do it well. So my question is, the longer we wait, the longer we wait, the data is going to actually go down. That's what I'm afraid of. And the storytelling is actually going to be what we have left. But in the meantime, without really getting to the next 5 or 10 years, how can we merge all of this? The data, the storytelling, to actually get to policies that can actually move the needle. And make sure that we can keep in mind that we're looking at different Black communities and not just one. So
So-
anyone can answer.
So your question is just basically, how do we do all the things now, not waiting 5 or 10 years to action them? Keeping in mind the intersectionalities of what being Black in Canada.
Because if you look at, I'm from a business background. We're gonna use data, people are gonna take longer to understand that before they buy from me. But if I tell you a story, it's a matter of minutes. You're
Right,
gonna connect to me and I'm gonna start buying, right? So how can we merge all this that we're hearing right now to start acting now, even if it's small steps versus having to wait
Sure.
5, 10 years?
sure. I'll let one of you decide if they're delegating, who wants to take it.
I'll just
Yeah.
give a quick response, which is, I think it's very much aligned with what Councillor Myers was saying, capacity building on a huge network. So I think it's really about that unity perspective. and
Sorry.
capacity.
Please speak up.
Sorry. Okay, so capacity building, to Councillor Myers' point, as well as unity and networking. The best collaborations are the ones that are unfounded, the ones that are just completely unique that you never expected, right? And you being a business person, understanding the importance of connection and relationships, you'll be able to capitalize and mobilize much faster. And this gets back to one of my earlier points, which is the fragmentation. Our community is not necessarily on the same page. So as a result of that, you need to find like-minded individuals, which do exist, and capitalize on that collective interest. That's what I would say, very short. And again, allies. Allies, when I think about my career and the mentors that I have around me, they're not all Black. I'm not going to sit here and say, I am where I am without that white voice that was at the table when I needed them the most, or that Asian voice that was at the table when I needed them the most, or the white chief of fire who calls me once a quarter to see, are you good? Just, you popped into my mind. So you can't have a demonstrative disposition, which is like, it can only be one specific way. You have to really think vertically and horizontally about where the opportunities lie.
Right, thank you. Anybody want to add to that, or?
I just have a lot of thoughts. They're a little jumbled, but I think it's a good point though, because you said that in business, if you were to tell a story, that's sort of the trigger for somebody to purchase, act, buy a product. Whereas the data, you got to think about it. Do I really want to buy this product? So if it works in business, what can we in the policy space learn from that? Right? So going back to networking, how do we connect? If that language is working in business and it's successful and it's yielding profit, how do we take those learnings, extract what we can extract, and apply that to the policy space? I'd actually be very interested in learning from the business perspective how to do that, because I keep on hearing the data, and it's great, but sometimes the data is not there and we can't wait for it. And if people are leaving and going back, at some point I'm like, I'm gonna leave this country, I'm born here, but I'm just gonna go back to Ghana because I could be living like a millionaire in Ghana right now, right? Versus here, you have to navigate all these systems. I can go to an interview and somebody might pass me up for a job opportunity because I'm a young Black woman, right? And I think that's very problematic. Whereas I can go to Ghana, I can go with my Master of Public Policy and get a director position right now. And nobody's gonna question my age. Nobody's gonna question how many years of experience I necessarily have, right? So I think the fact that folks are thinking about leaving this country and going back home is problematic in the sense that we are losing all of these brilliant minds. So how do we capitalize on what you're sharing, right? And also from a business perspective, as well as why are people leaving and how do we sort of keep folks here while still supporting, people wanting to go back? So I think it's a really good point and really good question.
Okay, thank you. Can I get another question from the audience? Oh. I'll take this out of the room. Go ahead, yeah.
So my name is, thank you all for joining, having this kind of. So my question is, since you all work in decentralized spaces, how do you navigate advocacy for the support of anti-Black racism policies or things of those natures while also being Black? Like, what are your tips or advice that you would give a young person entering this space And how do you kind of keep up that momentum, understanding that it's probably really draining, oftentimes having to advocate for the basic necessities of life? Kind of what advice would you,
Is it for the entire panel or you want to talk someone in particular?
whoever would like to open it up?
Councillor?
So I think if you're advocating for Black Canadians or Black employees, you have to be very strategic in terms of how you do it. Unfortunately, people get uncomfortable around the word Black. And it's, if you call yourself the Black whatever, they're like, oh, can we change it to multicultural so it's more inclusive? Or they'll always say things like that. And I think if you're gonna go in that space, you have to, one, build allyship, because you're not just gonna change things just with Black people. All the decision makers that you're gonna have to go through are not all Black. So you're gonna have to be able to build those alliances, that network, have that data at the ready, and build those relationships so that when you start making these asks, it's not you're sort of coming out of left field. You have a relationship with this person, your ask seems very reasonable, and it's just small. You just start small. If you ask for the moon, it's automatically a no. But if you just ask for something small, can we do something for the Black employee, a specific training, whatever it is, whatever you see the need being, if you go in small and you sort of start taking those small steps, I get Eunice's point, like we're tired of taking small steps.
Oh, no, that's okay. I'm okay with that.
Yeah, but you just gotta be strategic, because what I've seen a lot of people is they go in all gung-ho and they're gonna change the system, and the system's like, yeah. And they get very, very disgruntled. They are, they become very jaded once they sort of like run into that wall of resistance. And it's there. Even as a council, it's there, trust me. So you gotta do things in a way that, one, you're preserving yourself, that even if you aren't successful, you live to fight another day. But two, you're just continually moving the needle, even if it's slowly. And by the time people notice what you're doing, you're here. You might just be going like this, but like you gotta, as long as you're continually going forward, that's all that matters. How long it takes, sometimes it'll just be inches, and then something will happen and you just go like miles. So it's just about like making sure that when that opportunity is ready, whatever the opportunity looks like, that you have all of your ducks in a row to like move through that door very quickly.
Okay, I'm gonna go through one of the questions online. There's really good questions online, some with too much context, but I'm gonna kind of narrow this question. Hope I didn't. Here it is. So basically what this person was asking is, how can we value lived experiences and the oral tradition in policy areas? It takes years for data to catch up with what we know is true in experience. Sorry, you look ready.
Well, no, that's a very interesting question, because within the Indigenous context, they already do that with Ladue courts. So this is a practice that's already been adopted within our criminal justice system.
Okay.
Where they value, because the Indigenous culture is one where oral tradition is central to their identity. I think that there's pretty clear linkage in being able to find ways to capitalize on similar approaches. It just matters in what context. And I guess that would be where I would want to understand more formally, if that's within an organization, from a policy context, for Canadians more broadly, criminal justice system, but that does exist already.
Okay, so what you're saying is we already have the model, maybe we should consider how to kind of adapt it for.
Most
the Black
definitely,
community.
right? Replication or imitation is a wonderful thing.
Okay, thank you. Another question that's come up is, how have you been able to navigate barriers to advance policy innovation to dismantle anti-Black racism? I think I'll give that to you.
Can you repeat the question, please?
How have you been able to navigate barriers to advance policy innovation to dismantle anti-Black racism?
a loaded question. So I was sharing this the other day with somebody, and I think there's, from my experience, I'm not gonna talk generally, but from my experience, I think that sometimes when I'm going into a room with decision makers and they see me, or they may see a Black woman, for example, and there's this idea oftentimes, and I'm not pointing fingers or anything, I'm just using this for illustrative purposes. But when a Black woman enters a room, I think there's often this idea that we are very combative, and we are loud, and we are disrespectful, and we don't sort of listen to rules, regulations, whatever. But I think for me, I don't have an issue with things taking time. So for me, like if the change is going to be incremental, I'm actually very much for that. I actually don't go into a place and start being combative or saying we have to change this now, or I don't like what this organization is doing and you have to do it this way. I'm very much coming from an approach of education and sort of incremental changes. But I think that with recognizing that, I think in a space where, like in an organization that has not necessarily put out policies, developed, drafted, changed, implemented policies that benefit Black communities, I think that for me, I go into those spaces trying to come to a shared understanding in the sense of not everybody that I'm speaking to is coming from the same experience. Not everybody that I'm speaking to comes from the experience of how I've grown up, or sort of me having this sort of uncomfortable feeling around the education system. So I think it's, for me, is giving people grace. That's what I like. I like to lead with patience and also giving people grace, because I don't know everything. I'm also learning from other people. Just because I'm a Black woman and I'm working in the anti-racism space does not mean that I know everything either. Like I'm also learning. So I think coming from that perspective, from a humble perspective, but also recognizing that there are lived experiences that I have. There are sort of, there's knowledge that I bring to the table as well. I think my points are valid and I think my experience should be heard. But at the same time, I think that I don't like to enter spaces and sort of just say that this is how it has to be done. I like to have the conversation. And I think that when it comes to an area, like I work in the procurement space, and sometimes folks will say like, we need to be fair in the way that we are reviewing a solicitation, like a request for quotes, for example. So I think understanding that business sort of procurement perspective helps me to understand that even though we are trying to be equitable and we're trying to be anti-racist in this space, there are certain infrastructures, there are certain laws, there are certain policies that don't necessarily allow for that type of flexibility right now. But as we go on in this journey, we can do, like you're saying, Councillor, there's incremental changes that we can do. So we can start collecting race-based data to see where are our dollars going as an organization like TTC, for example, right? So I think being a Black woman in this space, because we talked about the glass cliff and didn't really connect it to the rest of the conversation, but I think being a Black woman in this space, I think it's important to understand that, yes, there are perceptions of how we present ourselves and how we are perceived, but we can rise above that. Like I do not go into a space and allow anybody to have this perception that you're a loudmouth. I'm sorry to use that term, but I go into a space and I will listen to you speak. Like I said, I don't know everything. So I will listen to other people's perspectives, other people's narratives, even if they disagree with me. I'm okay with it because we can learn. I can disagree with you and you can teach me. Right. So I think that in this space, if you're interested in getting into the policy space and working in this area, and especially pushing things around anti-racism, there are situations to be I'm a very frank person, so I'm not going to sugarcoat anything. Yeah. But if you are in a space where you're uncomfortable and you feel like the work isn't moving and what you're trying to change isn't happening, I would just say give people grace. And I don't know if I'm fully answering the question, but I would say give people the grace to learn. And also give yourself grace too, right? Like I, as a Black woman, as a Black mother, it gets very difficult because there's so much you have to do outside of the home. I cannot clock out of my 9 to 5 and say, this work that I'm doing does not relate to me, because it does. I have to take this work home. It's my reality. It's the reality of my husband, my son, my sister, my father, my mother as a Black individual. So I think understanding that, but also giving myself grace and being patient, these things take time, I think will help you be more successful in that space versus just trying to go in there and try to change everything and then nothing really come out of it. So that's sort of like just trying to tie back some of the things that we were talking about, which can allow us to also set ourselves up for success, even if the infrastructure isn't there for us to succeed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, and I appreciate you bringing it all together. Again, I did get my 5-minute warning, but I have one last question that's online that I really wanted to ask all three of you. So what is one thing that the audience can do to influence policy aimed at improving the lives of Black people in Canada? Just one thing. Let's start with you, Councillor. I know you didn't get as much time to think about it, but
Build your expertise.
build your expertise.
Build your expertise in a particular issue. So I was a community organizer,
Yes.
and I focused on transit. So
Mm,
when I became chair, I knew a lot about transit. So it wasn't just like, and then I could focus on, I could have conversations as like not having people leave me around. I actually have my own basis of knowledge to go from. So whatever you're interested in changing, you need to build your expertise in that particular field so that when you speak, you can speak with authority.
I love that. I think that's great advice. Thank you.
Can I think about it?
Yes, please. Are you ready, sir?
Yeah, I mean. Tough one. That's a doozy because there's so many ways to go about it.
Yeah.
But what I would say is be engaged, and engaged in form of, if there's a problem that you're solving for, you have to be able to network necessarily with, the individuals who are impacted, align yourself with organizations, just get involved. And that will give you a little bit more context in ways in which you can navigate the system more strategically. That'll snowball into a whole slew of things. I really believe I'm here as a result of my engagement with United Way. United Way was an organization that I was a service recipient of way back when I relocated to Winnipeg. And Winnipeg was a doozy. Okay. So I was a service recipient. I felt led to give back. And as a result of that, I really became an individual who had an understanding of philanthropy, a profound understanding of homelessness, social justice, and it just snowballed into my undergrad, my master's, so on and so forth. So, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for that type of engagement.
Okay. All right, thank you so much.
Okay, and then please can you repeat the question?
For sure. So what is one thing that the audience can do to influence policy aimed at improving the lives of Black people in Canada?
Okay, I would say start with what you're passionate about. I think that's because when I started, so actually I right after high school wanted to come to Ryerson at the time, so TMU now, to study fashion design and then go to law school, and then that did not happen. That was like, my professor is like, I think you should consider a career in policy. I think you'd be great in that space. I'm like, what's policy? Don't know what it is. Let me figure it out and kind of explore that option. So I think like starting from, and the reason why policy made sense actually because I had a passion for addressing the issues that I had seen, witnessed, experienced growing up. So I think starting from a place where you're passionate about something, if there's a specific issue, or not even from a place of like an issue or a problem, but something that you want to advance or something that you want to begin or something that you want to start, that's how CBPN came about. It was a passion project. So I think starting from a place where you are passionate about something will help you stay motivated even when things aren't necessarily going the way that you want it to go. So I think for me, that would be the advice, and then just volunteer to kind of explore those passions and see if that can be sort of like a viable option as it relates to policy field.
Okay, so let me see if I can summarize. So the first thing was, I'm trying to one word it. Expertise, yes. So be an expert in your area, so expertise. Asare, one word, be engaged, okay, or 2 words. And lastly, I don't know how to summarize yours.
Start from a place of passion.
Start from the place of passion. Okay, so those are all phrases, they're not one words, but thank you for help from the audience. Okay, so this has been an awesome night. I'm so sorry, we have to wrap up the questions, people. So first I want to thank you, the panel, of course, for such an insightful conversation. There's so many rebuttals and things that I wanted to come with, but I was trying to respect time. I hope everyone here and everyone online also enjoyed the session. I'd also like to thank our community partner again, so the Canadian Black Policy Network, for helping spread the word about this event and inviting their members to attend. Eunice, you will now take the moment to speak about CBPN's work.
Their just just quickly, so CBPN started, we launched myself, Annika, Russell Dutois, so if you're watching, I'm gonna shout you out as well, and Charnel Morgan. We were both 3 students at the U of T's Master Public Policy program back in 2016 and 2017. So I personally had no intention of going to U of T because I just didn't think there was any representation there in terms of Black representation. So I was very resistant to that, but it worked out that I ended up going there. So we ended up, Annika and another individual at the school at the time had connected with the Harvard Kennedy School. They have an annual Black Policy Conference that they've been putting on, I think, for maybe 10 or 11 years now. So they connected with the Harvard Kennedy School, and that was a time, I think it was in 2018, where Harvard had their first international panel focus on Black Canadians. And so we thought, when we went to Harvard, why do we always feel more comfortable to go to the US to have these conversations? It's sort of a norm there. It's a little bit uncomfortable when you start talking about race in Canada. So we thought, okay, we are Canadian born and we should be able to have these conversations here. So we looked around, kind of searched, didn't see anything that had to do with Black policy, a Black policy network or conference in Canada. And at the time, we had just freshly graduated out of the U of T. So we thought, why don't we just start something? Why don't we bring the idea to the City of Toronto? City of Toronto, thank you so much. Ended up taking the idea, we all ran with it. We put on the first conference in 2019. We had over 300 people online in person come. It was a big hit. Everybody was asking for another conference. But after that conference, and even prior to that, we thought it's great to have a conference where we can have these conversations. There's a lot of things that we can talk about. We can talk about the issue, but how do we extract concrete actions that we can actually implement and then take to municipal governments and then take to provincial, territorial, and the federal government to actually implement, to actually make a change. So we thought Canadian Black Policy Network is something that we need across Canada because it's been over 100 years and we didn't have anything like that. And so we launched on Emancipation Day, I believe 2020, so almost 4 years now. And so right now I serve as the co-executive director. Nancy Wanye is the other co-executive director. And right now we're actually in the phase where we brought on our inaugural board of directors. We have our executive committee, so the folks who do the day-to-day things around marketing, communications, policy, and all that great stuff. And we are now at the point where we've been able to garner government funding to be able to develop our first strategic plan, which will allow us to go out to community and ask, what is it that you actually want to see from a Canadian Black Policy Network? So we're very clear in saying that we are coming from a policy perspective. We want to affect change in the policy space, but we also want to ensure that when we have these conversations, that there's concrete actions that reflect the voices of our community. So we don't, and when I say we're tired, it's not because I'm impatient, but I'm saying that we've been sharing our stories. There's data that's been collected for over 100 years. It's there. Maybe it's just not an essential place, but the information is there. So how do we now bring all of that together and create sort of a repository of our own research that can then be used by the public sector, nonprofit sector, and then the different levels of government to actually ensure that policies that are being developed, policies that are being redrafted, actually reflect our voices, and that we are also adequately consulted, right? So we don't want there to be a situation where the City of Toronto, maybe, for example, is drafting, or the province of Ontario is drafting, you know, a new policy or making a policy decision, and our communities haven't been consulted. So it's really being able to be that present and that go-to organization that provides that voice. And again, I'll say that the Black community is not a monolith. So we're not here to speak on behalf of anybody in a sense, but we want to make sure that when we are engaging with Black communities and Black-led organizations, that those voices are then reflected in the decisions that are being made. So we're there to be a vehicle to ensure that decisions that are being made by governments are actually reflecting our needs and addressing the issues properly.
Okay, so will there be another conference this year? We're being asked.
Yes, yeah,
Yeah.
we're in the works. People need to fund us, like we need the money so that we can put this on. But yes, we are hoping to have another conference.
When do you usually hold?
So we usually have it in November, the last Saturday of November, every 2 years. We didn't have one last year because we're bringing on our board of directors. So we're hoping to have one this spring. So yeah, look out.
Stay tuned.
Yeah, stay tuned.
Okay. And also, just with everything you're saying, is there an opportunity for people to be involved with your organization?
Yes. Well, we did have a call for applications that just closed. So in terms of joining the executive committee, those positions will pretty much be full. But once we start solidifying all of the plans for the conference, we will like to bring on some volunteers, and our directors also might want to bring students in master's programs or undergrad programs to carry out some of the day-to-day of the organization. So as we build out our strategic plan, we'll be able to sort of nail down where we need some additional support.
And where can I go to find you?
You can go to www.cdpn.ca. All the information is there, and then our handle is at BPNCAN.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, so thank you, Eunice. Once again, thank you to all our panelists, Councillor and Asare as well. So this event is also one of many of events that the Dais is delivering for the next few months. And we hope that you'll come back for other events that we'll be doing. And of course, next year, we hope to do Black in Policy again. So if you are located in Hamilton, we have an education planning pathways workshop where we talk about just different pathways to education and streaming, and how that impacts the Black community and young folks in middle school to grade 9. We also have the EU Talks Women in Tech celebrating International Women's Day 2024 coming up as well. We have a masterclass in strategic communication with Sarah Perry, who was Obama's speechwriter, and she'll also be doing a speechwriting 101 workshop as well. You can visit the website at Dais, so DAIS.ca. Follow us on social media and join our newsletter to learn more about our work. For those joining online, I wish you a good evening. And for those who are in person, it's now 7:29, so we'll have 30 minutes to network instead of 45. I hope that is okay. There's still some refreshments in the back. And yeah, other than that, thank you all. This was great. Thank you again. Thank you.